I think it's time to start the global cleanup, starting with your smelly ass. Your stench is worse than I thought.
Hey everyone, Crow back again, and I've recently finished playing the games included in Duke Nukem Collection 2 for the Evercade. So what I'll be doing here is briefly talking about each of the games, rating and ranking them, and finally ranking the collection as a whole. As for the collection itself, this is another collection of 3 Duke Nukem games. The games included are Duke Nukem Time to Kill, originally released in 1998 for the original PlayStation, Duke Nukem Land of the Babes, originally released in 2000, also for the original PlayStation, and Duke Nukem Advance, which was originally released in 2002 for the Game Boy Advance. The packaging for this collection is the same as it is for all other Evercade collections. The cartridge comes in a clamshell case, there's a full color manual that's included, and there are no bonus items included with this one. I played all 3 games on my Evercade VS with the standard Evercade controller. This is an oddity because I normally use my Mayflash F500 arcade stick when I play these games on the Evercade VS. This is the rare circumstance where I don't think the games included would play very well with an arcade stick. Now I've decided to talk about these games in the order in which they were originally released, and that'll lead us to our first game. Duke Nukem Time to Kill was developed by N-Space, and when I was looking up information for the game, the same description always seemed to pop up. It's like Tomb Raider, but more action-based. And you know what? That's a pretty accurate description. The game's story takes place sometime after Duke 3D. The aliens, annoyed with Duke Nukem thwarting their Earth takeover attempt, plan on eliminating Duke by altering the past. So Duke will find and activate the time machine and send himself through different time periods to prevent that from happening. He'll travel to the Old West, medieval Europe, and ancient Rome, while occasionally returning to the present day to see what the effect changing the past has had.
I don't dig on the new strippers. Someone's gonna pay.
The interesting thing is that the game itself doesn't really tell you what's going on unless you pause the game. Then it'll show a little text blurb of what's going on in the level you're currently on. As for the gameplay, yeah, pretty much like Tomb Raider, only with a whole lot more weapons and shooting. But there's still plenty of platforming and puzzles, though I think calling them puzzles might be kind of a stretch. I mean, most of the game is finding keys and switches to open doors to new areas containing more enemies to shoot. As far as the controls, they work perfectly fine with the standard Evercade controller. The original game was designed with the original PlayStation controller in mind, so there's no need to really worry about having precise analog controls. The game never really supported that to begin with. For the most part, you don't even need to aim your gun to shoot the aliens. As long as they're on screen, Duke will automatically aim at them as indicated by the red targeting reticle. Otherwise, you can hold the R1 button to stand in place and look and aim manually. There's lots of actions you can perform. In fact, every button on the controller is used in this one. You could run, walk, strafe, shoot, jump, crouch, holster or draw your weapon, swim, fly using a jetpack, and interact with the environment, though it might take a bit of time to get used to the controls. I was only a couple levels in before the controls started feeling second nature to me. You're even given 2 different ways to switch weapons, either by holding select and bringing up a full list of your inventory, or by holding the draw holster button and pressing left or right to make your selection. The advantage to pressing select, though, is that the game will pause while you make your choice. It's also the only way to select auxiliary items like your med kit, jetpacks, goggles, or biomass. After I played for a few hours, I was really starting to get into the game. I spent maybe a total of 6 to 8 hours playing it over about 4 or 5 days, and when I wasn't playing, I was actually looking forward to the next time I would have the chance to continue the game. There were a lot of hidden secret areas to find, and I really enjoyed figuring out the best way to infiltrate an area that would be packed with enemies. The game isn't perfect though, and it does have some issues that hold it back. One thing that's kind of a nuisance is that the button that shoots is also the same button you'd use for interacting with the environment. If you want to throw a switch and you're not in just the right spot, then Duke will shoot instead and you'll waste a bullet. The best thing you could do to prevent that is to holster your weapon so you can't shoot, but sometimes you're opening a door to a room that may have aliens in it, and you'd like to have your gun out just in case. There were also some situations where I thought it was kind of annoying that I had to manually holster the weapon, like if I wanted to get out some water. Duke absolutely will not get out unless you holster your gun, which kind of sucks in a situation where you know you're going to get attacked the second you get out. I also kind of wished it was easier to keep track of the story as it was unfolding. Like I said, you have to pause the game to see where the plot is for the level you're on. But often I'd just plain forget to hit start to pause because normally that's not something you'd have to do in a game to keep track of what's going on. It doesn't hurt to have these details on the pause screen, but I think it should have just popped up automatically just as each level starts. There would have been an added advantage as well that you'd have to hit a button to start the level, because the way it is now, the game just throws you in the second the level's done loading. And that wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for some levels where you get attacked if you don't start moving right away. In fact, the game starts out that way. Also, though the game does normally do a good job of automatically aiming at the aliens, sometimes Duke just doesn't, though you think he might be. And sometimes he is shooting at them, but the red reticle isn't showing that he is. And due to the third-person nature of the game, sometimes there's aliens on the screen, but you can't see them because Duke's body is in the way. Oh, okay, that doesn't really happen that often, but there was one situation in particular I remember because the ground was sloped downward, and Duke's back was up close against the wall, causing the camera to be closer to him than it normally would have been. But you know what? Despite all these weird quirks, I'm really glad I played this game, and I thought it was really fun on the default difficulty. Not too hard, and not too easy for me. And even if it was too hard, this Duke Nukem game has something Duke Nukem Total Meltdown didn't have. A ton of cheat codes where I could play through the game with invincibility and unlimited weapons if I wanted to. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Duke Nukem Land of the Babes was also developed by N-Space, and it's pretty much a direct sequel to the previous game, Time to Kill. It has the same third-person perspective and shooting/platforming elements as the previous game, but a few tweaks have been made, some for the better, and some that are not so good in my opinion. Sometime in the future, aliens have completely taken over Earth, exterminated all the men, and enslaved all the women. A few of the women have escaped capture and formed the United Babe Resistance, who realize they're going to need help in reclaiming the planet. So they use a time machine to contact the one man who single-handedly repeatedly thwarted previous alien attacks. That's right, Duke Nukem. The game starts just after Duke enters the portal to the future. And from here, the game plays basically like Time to Kill, with some changes here and there. So here's what's different. Duke can no longer crouch, and I don't think that's a big deal. The L1 button is no longer used to force Duke to walk, and that's fine because Duke's movements have been refined a bit where Duke will just walk by tapping the D-pad. But instead, L1 is now used to auto-target the nearest enemy, and I was a little confused by this because Duke was already usually focusing fire on enemies close to the reticle and following them, but I guess this will force the focus on an enemy anywhere on the screen, and while actually shooting with this enabled is great, it winds up being another button you have to hold down while shooting and running around. It kind of becomes a pain to hold L1 while shooting with the X button, while turning and moving back and forth with the D-pad, and also pressing L2 and R2 to strafe. I would often just stand still taking damage while shooting, or if I absolutely needed to move, I'd just run around blindly and hope I wouldn't run off a cliff or something. Something I did appreciate was that Duke will now automatically put his weapon away to climb on things, and then automatically bring it out when he's done. However, it doesn't always work in every situation. You'll still need to holster your weapon to climb out of water, for example. Another thing is that you could still hold the B button to change weapons, but you can now change equipment as well with this method. And select is still available to pause the game and change weapons and equipment, but now they're broken up inside your own menu system, and I gotta say I like the previous game system better because now it's just more menus to navigate.
Looks like you lost your cool and your head.
The major improvement over the last game is that there's now usually cutscenes at the beginning and end of levels, which makes it a hell of a lot easier to follow the game's story and what Duke is actually supposed to be doing. During levels, you'll even get these codex-style calls from the Resistance leader, which greatly enhance the story. However, on the flip side, I feel the way the game handles your health is the worst change that has been made. All previous Duke games have had a pretty simple health management system. Regular healing items will heal you up to 100%, but no more. But there were special items that could raise your health over 100%, and the only way to lose health was to take damage. In this game, however, as you kill enemies, you gain health, even over 100%. The catch is if your health is over 100%, it'll continuously drain until it's back at 100%. And this would be fine if the game was fast-paced, non-stop action, but it's not. There's a lot of exploring you need to do in this game, and by the time you make progress, any health gains you've made over 100% will more than likely be gone. There are still healing items in this game too, and they're shown as ego boosts. But if your health is 100%, you can't pick them up. The kicker is, and the thing that absolutely makes no sense, is that if your health is anywhere under 100%, the ego boost can potentially boost your health past 100%. So why can't I pick it up at 100% and get some temporary bonus health? My health was at 100% most of the time anyway because killing aliens instantly gives you health. You would purposefully need to injure yourself in order to pick up the ego boost in order to gain more health, and that just shows how broken the health system in this game is. You know what though? In the end, it almost all evens out. It seems like for every positive change, there's a negative one. The game is still just as playable as Time to Kill, and there are plenty of cheats you can enable and activate in this game. They even have a menu option dedicated to them. You could do your standard invincibility and all weapons and unlimited ammo cheats, but there are a few purely visual ones in here as well. I mean, I may want to run through the game again with Big Head mode on and wacky cutscenes enabled. In the end though, I think I've got to give this one a 7 out of 10. 1 point less than Time to Kill. I absolutely do not like the changes to the health management, and Duke spends way too much time underwater in this game. There are at least 3 straight levels where Duke is constantly underwater, and while I don't hate the underwater stuff, I would just prefer if he'd stick to land.
Good riddance. If I never swim again, it'll be too soon.
Duke Nukem Advance was originally created for the Game Boy Advance, as the name would imply, and it goes back to the first-person perspective, but don't think that this is a port of Duke Nukem 3D, because this is a completely new Duke Nukem adventure. It was developed by Taurus Games, who created the Southpaw engine, which was used to produce first-person shooters for the Game Boy Advance. This game begins with Duke being sent out on a mission to Area 51 by General Graves to investigate reports of an infiltration of hostile aliens, and what follows is Duke doing what he does best: shooting aliens. Throughout the game, the plot unfolds into something bigger as Duke and the General have regular conversations throughout the game. The gameplay is a lot like Duke Nukem 3D, except it's pared down a lot to account for the power of the Game Boy Advance and the lack of extra buttons. You can still look and move using the D-pad, strafe using left and right shoulder buttons, and also shoot and jump using regular face buttons. Holding select while pressing left and right shoulder buttons will allow you to cycle through your weapons, and if you hold down both shoulder buttons, you can look up and down using the D-pad. Though to be honest, it doesn't seem like you could look up or down very far. What's missing is the ability to turn around 180 degrees with the press of a button, and you no longer have a use button. Instead, Duke will open doors and throw switches by bumping into them. Duke also no longer has an inventory of supplemental items. This means no jetpack, no medkits, no steroids, and no night vision goggles. But despite all this, the gameplay is just fine. All the levels were designed around the limitations of the Game Boy Advance hardware, and it really streamlines things. I kind of like just being able to bump into things to activate them and not really have to worry about using the jetpack or night vision goggles. It's just straight up running around and shooting aliens. The levels are noticeably smaller though, but do still contain a few secret areas for you to discover. It seems the real huge hurdle to get over with this one is the graphics. Now this game is designed for the small Game Boy Advance screen, and I tested this out on a Super Pocket and the game looked fine on that screen. But I played through this game on a 60-inch television using the Evercade VS, and wow, talk about blowing up a really low resolution image. I was still able to identify aliens and stuff moving in the background, but man, my eyes really needed to adjust to that. Other than that, you could still really tell that this is a downgrade from Duke Nukem 3D. There's no music playing during the game, the sound samples used are really compressed.
What a mess.
And though the game runs smoothly most of the time, and when I say smoothly, I'm talking like 30 frames a second at its best, there are times when the frame rate just utterly tanks. There are also a couple of time levels in the game I really didn't enjoy, because you're forced to scramble around looking for an exit, running around, and you really can't stop and shoot any of the aliens you see because you might run out of time if you do. So here's the deal. At the time this came out over 20 years ago on the Game Boy Advance, it was probably amazing. A perfectly playable portable version of Duke Nukem more than likely worthy of an 8 or 9 out of 10. The problem is that sometimes games just don't hold up 2 decades later running on hardware it wasn't originally intended for. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think this is a good game and it's still playable and can be enjoyable, but man, is it looking rough these days, especially if you're playing it on the Evercade VS, which leads me to a dilemma here. The game obviously is a better experience on a handheld like the original Evercade and the Evercade EXP and even the Super Pocket, but I primarily play on the Evercade VS. Okay, so after thinking about it, I'd give this a 7 out of 10 if playing on an Evercade VS, but an 8 out of 10 if playing this on any of the handhelds. And since you could literally play an Evercade handheld anywhere, I'll stick with the 8 out of 10 score with this one.
Holy cow.
Alright, so let me rank these 3 games. I'm going to give third to Duke Nukem Land of the Babes. It's basically been changed too much from the usual Duke Nukem formula. I mean, there's too many underwater levels, and I didn't really like the changes to the health system that were made. And second, I'm going to give it to Duke Nukem Advance. It's a very playable first-person shooter that may be more basic than the original Duke Nukem 3D, but still pretty fun, especially if you play on a handheld. And my favorite game of this collection is gonna be Duke Nukem Time to Kill. This first attempt at a third-person Duke Nukem game worked out surprisingly well and had a good challenge with interesting scenery and costume changes for each of the eras that Duke visits. As for ranking Duke Nukem Collection 2 against all other Evercade carts I've looked at so far, well, I gave 2 games an 8 and 1 a 7. That'll put this on the bottom of the D+ level just below Interplay Collection 2. And believe me, the only reason this is below Interplay Collection 2 is because that has more games on it. And that'll wrap it up for Duke Nukem Collection 2. The next cart I'm going to be looking at is the dual cart of Good Boy Galaxy and Witch and Whiz. I've heard good things about Good Boy Galaxy. I haven't heard anything about Witch and Whiz, so we'll see about those two next time.